Aaliyah's final studio album is a timeless masterpiece. Let's talk about it. What's up, y'all? It's your boy Amorphous, and welcome to the Album Arcade, my brand new series breaking down some of my favorite albums. This will just be a great place to rediscover some music you love, or maybe find something new that you never even heard of. So I've been thinking about doing something like this for a while because I feel like discussing music is just as important as listening to music. If you don't know who I am, I'm a producer, filmmaker, DJ. I do a little bit of everything, honestly. There's one particular album, to me, that personifies everything about the reason why I wanted to do music in the first place, and that is none other than Aaliyah's final studio album, self-titled, also referred to as the Red Album. So if you don't know, this album actually got re-released on vinyl a few years ago from a company called Vinyl Me Please. It's basically a record of the month club. So thanks to them, I was able to snag this, the physical vinyl that they put out of the Aaliyah album, and it honestly has made my entire collection over there. If you could see, I put it as the centerpiece. It really holds a special place in my heart. I know a lot of people are kind of struggling to get them from other services and stuff, but VMP, they came through and I was able to purchase and buy this because I wanted to support them. So when it comes to the R&B space, experimenting, and the term alternative R&B, I feel like this album was the true precursor for a lot of that. Now, there are some other albums that came out around this time that also experimented with their sounds, but I feel like this album does it the best. From the moment that this album opens, you know that you're going to be listening to something a little bit different. Now, that has always been her style, but I feel like it was amped up to an 11 on this album. And I'll never forget my brother playing We Need a Resolution for the first time around the time that it came out as a lead single in April. We Need a Resolution was the perfect example of that. The sample alone, Tricks of the Trade from the Incognito score by John Ottman, is crazy. We all know Timbaland is a genius, but I really feel like We Need a Resolution is probably his best produced track. I was 3 years old when this album came out in 2001. I was a baby, but this was the album that genuinely inspired me to do music. My brother used to say that anytime that song came on, I started beatboxing to it as a 3-year-old, or attempting to. So I credit this album as my introduction to discovering my talents, even though I didn't know that as a 3-year-old. Now, unfortunately, the general public has a big misconception about this album. Missy and Timbaland only did a few tracks on the Aaliyah album. Timbaland did We Need a Resolution, More Than a Woman, and I Care For You, and Missy only wrote on I Care For You. Fun fact about I Care For You, if you don't know, that was a track originally written and recorded for 1 in a Million, her sophomore album previous to this. But it didn't make the track list in time, so they decided to hold it off for her third album, where she subsequently re-recorded the song. So with that being said, this album was primarily produced by her label's in-house production camp that includes Eric Seats, Rapture, J-Dub, and Butter. They killed it with the production on this album. I feel like Timbaland's influence at this time was just industry-wide anyway, but they really were able to pick up the baton, even though he couldn't contribute as much. You can't talk about the production on this album without talking about Extra Smooth in particular. I mean, the key changes are sick on that track, and I love how the production was able to complement the lyrical content of a guy being too cool for you or feeling himself way too much. There's a cockiness to that track and a level of goofiness that's like almost mocking that man in the production, and I love that about that. I honestly feel like she's underrated as a vocalist. I think a lot of people mistake vocalists for powerhouse singers only, and that's not really the case in my mind. I think what Aaliyah was able to do with her voice, specifically on this album, but in other settings as well, was so intricate. Her runs were so beautifully placed. As much love as Timbaland and Missy gets for their partnership with Aaliyah, Static Major is another big part in her musical identity, and I honestly feel like this album is just as much of his as it was hers and his mine, probably. But that's beautiful, and that's why their partnership worked so well. They understood each other like yin and yang. Static knew how to use her voice in so many interesting ways, and that creates a layered sonic experience on this album. You have the lush melodies and harmonies of a song like Rock the Boat, which is my favorite Aaliyah song of all time. Sorry, it just is. Her vocal growth from 1 in a Million to this is literally insane. I mean, the maturity in her voice. So before Rock the Boat became my favorite aaliyah song, it was actually Loose Rap, which is so funny because that was supposed to be the first single before Timbaland presented We Need a Resolution as a track to even do. Now personally, I would have put out More Than a Woman as the lead single. I feel like that was the right choice after Try Again. That song was massive. It was everywhere. It was her first #1. It was the first song to go #1 solely based off of airplay. So I feel like a lot of people were ready to really embrace more of the urban pop side of aaliyah's music. I mean, even before Try Again, you had a track like Are You That Somebody, which was crossing over outside of the R&B appeal to widestream audiences. And I find it so funny that a lot of people call this album a flop. If you guys come in the comments to say people haven't said that, they have. I feel like a lot of people, unfortunately, are lacking critical thinking and context when it comes to the circumstances surrounding this release. I don't really understand how you could call this album a flop when it opened to nearly 200,000 copies in its first week, with a single that released 3 months beforehand and didn't really make too many waves on the charts. But the Aaliyah album itself opened nearly that of what Usher's 8701 did. I don't really understand that concept that she was quote unquote flopping. And you also have to take into account that there was no new single out at the time at all either. So she did a couple of performances, she did Jay Leno, she did Regis and Kelly, and then she kind of took a back seat and was preparing to promote the album in the fall. And honestly, I would have done the same thing. I would have said, you know what, I put the album out, but this album is going to have a long shelf life, because Alicia Keys that came out that same year. And in 2001, outside of the pop space, in the R&B space, neo soul was dominating the airwaves. That was a sound at the time. Alicia Keys' introduction was incredible. It was an amazing run, and she deserved everything she got that year. But the Aaliyah album, the critics got it, but it was kind of released at an interesting time where most people weren't really gravitating towards this specific sound of the album. And in the year where Survivor and Independent Women and so many different pop songs are out and doing their things on the charts, I just feel like that would have been the best single as the introduction to the album. Maybe on the aaliyah2001.com site, which is her site that she had, they could have released We Need a Resolution as a promo single or something, but what can we do? The song came out, it's an amazing song, but I do feel like a lot of people were not ready for that. What sets this album apart from others, in my opinion, is the way that she was able to genre bend on this album and still make it sound cohesive. There's definitely different examples of people using different genres to bring into R&B, especially around this time, but I think this album really does it the best. When you have a track like Read Between the Lines and its Latin flair, they were still able to incorporate this futuristic sound on that track. The pitch bending and the chopping of her vocals mixed with that Latin sound, that was Aaliyah. It was like, okay, she is always looking for new sounds, different ways to incorporate it into her sound and not just hopping on a new wave. The rock elements on this album, which are really important to the album's identity, are incredible. I Can Be is one of the best songs, period. And it's really underrated. I don't understand it. I mean, play that in an amazing sound system, it's just everything to me. So if you didn't know, Aaliyah was a big 9 Inch Nails fan. She tried to incorporate Trent Reznor into the album, but they couldn't make it work for scheduling. You know, my girl, she was booked and busy, okay? She had movies lined up to like 2008. But Butta and J-Dub did a great job on the production of I Can Be and What If, and Tank was a great lyrical standard for those two tracks. His background vocals on I Can Be really helped elevate the track. My only small gripe about the rock tracks, and this is probably an intentional choice, is that the mixing has her vocals a little bit too low for the instrumental. When you have so many different elements in the production, her voice kind of gets lost in it, but a couple of fans have taken it upon themselves to do their own mixing and mastering of the track, so I advise you to go on YouTube and look for them. Or maybe I'll put them in the description as well, so you can kind of hear some of the really cool vocal things that she was doing on both of those tracks. Now, most Aaliyah fans already know this, but a lot of her vocal stylings were a choice. She held back her voice, especially on a lot of these studio records. In the 1990s when she debuted, powerhouse vocalists were all the rage at the time. I mean, you have Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey, Celine Dion, so many artists dominating the charts. And that's what most people expected from a singer at the time in the R&B space. Here she comes along at 14, 15 years old with this angelic voice piercing through your sound system. That was different than what was on the radio at the time. So when I hear a lot of people say, oh, Aaliyah couldn't really sing, or she was just kind of like humming around, well, the latter part of her just kind of singing casually, that was the choice that was made to set her apart from her contemporaries and her peers at the time. But even then, even with that softer vocal choice that she kind of showed, she did some really beautiful things with her voice. A great example of that is on a track like It's Whatever. Her voice in that record is crisp, clear. It's like you're sitting by the ocean and just listening to a mermaid come about and sing to you. Like, that's the qualities that she had in her voice even from a young age. Now, the most underrated track to me on this album is probably You Got Nerve. That track for some reason gets lost in the sauce of like the conversations of people's favorites, but that track, the way that she's kind of like floating on it on the verses is really great. So again, I would not exist as a creative without this album. It is my personal baby, my favorite album of all time from my favorite artist of all time. It just spoke to me as some of the most formative years as a literal baby slash child. And it's been beautiful to see Aaliyah's legacy get the justice that it deserves so many years later. A lot of reason why her fans have gravitated towards her is not just because of the music, but because of the person that she was. And sometimes, you know, you can tell exactly who people are just from the way that they carried themselves. You know, obviously you do have the exceptions of people being completely, you know, trash behind the scenes, but now that I've been in this industry and all the people that I've gotten to talk to that actually knew her and so many stories that I've gotten to hear, there's never been a negative thing to say about this young woman that existed on this earth. And I know for a fact she was very proud of this album, and it's up to us, especially for our Black legends, to amplify them and to continue to tell their stories and prop up their music. This album's legacy has sustained so much. It does not help that this album was not available on streaming for like almost 20 years. It's actually ridiculous. At this point, I think most Aaliyah fans are just exhausted of all of it. I think we are just advocating for her legacy to be treated right, but her music is available. I know there's a lot of interesting family dynamics, and you know, my heart goes out to Diana Rashad. I cannot imagine, you know, the things that they have had to go through and deal with, but at the end of the day, she was their daughter, their sister. Nobody can take that away from them, but I am very, very happy that Aaliyah's music is available for everyone to stream, specifically One in a Million and her self-titled album. I just found it a little weird that only that specific album was available, and it just never sat right with me. When you have albums today like Anti by Rihanna or some of Beyonce's albums, a lot of that sonic exploration I think really started with this album. Obviously before this, again, you have examples like Janet Jackson and Control, but I truly feel like this album is the perfect example if you're looking for exploring within your genres but also keeping your signature sound and having it be you. So now that this album can be easily consumed in the digital age, I really hope that a lot of the people that may not be as well versed in their Aaliyah discography can understand and identify a lot of the sonic soundscape in the R&B space today. When you have artists like Adele, Beyonce, Rihanna, Banks, the list goes on, the XX, so many different artists of different genres have touted Aaliyah as an influence, but also specifically have shouted out this album and the things that she did with it as things that they were able to take and apply to their own music. You have to give this album the credit that is due. So guys, I would love to continue to talk about this album, but I didn't want to make it too long. Please let me know if you guys want me to do like a breakdown of the history of this album and the making of it. I can always do that. There was no way that I could start this new series without talking about this album first. So keep it locked right here at the Album Arcade if you want to hear about more of my favorite albums. And as always, thank you guys for all of the support. I'm forever grateful. I don't take it for granted at all. I wake up every day just thanking God for giving me not just a platform, but a community. So thank y'all for listening to me talk today. I am excited about the next album that we have. And yeah, I would love to know what your relationship to this album or your favorite track is in the comments. If you have a physical copy, let me know. This album, it's my baby. All right, peace out.
I've got good friends, I've got a beautiful family, and I've got a career. I am truly blessed, and I thank God for his blessings every single chance I get.